Many of you will know that there's a salmon farming consultation event happening later on at 7 o'clock. So we'll have to keep things moving, so please forgive me if I do move things along, but also if you've got any questions or comments, if you could keep them as press-aid as possible, that would be great. And so that we can make a quick getaway after the event, I'm going to do all the thank yous now rather than afterwards. You'll know, I'm sure many of you, just how much effort it takes to put these kind of events on. So I want to thank a few people before we get going. Particularly Diane over there from Patagonia, who's given up her own time to volunteer and has helped us. Help doesn't really do it justice over the last 6 weeks to put all this together. So thank you to Diane. But also Ailsa, who's on the panel with us and been helping out as well for a good few weeks. Thank you very much, Ailsa. Rachel from Wild Fish has been unbelievable. Everything that she's done to make it happen has been absolutely extraordinary, not least keeping me under control and on track. Cal and James, many of you will know Cal and James from the local area. I'm just going to say thanks. They have been invaluable over the last few weeks, and you will see their contribution a little bit later. But I also want to thank particularly and very specially Janice and the Ullapool Sea Savers, who have made an incredible contribution to the event, but also, as many of you will know, continue to raise the issues and fight the good fight now and over many years. So thank you very much. And lastly, to all of you, I know it's not easy to get to these events, so thank you for taking the time and effort. It's good to see so many people out and about. Our panel, our delightful panel, if you don't know who they are, I'm just going to run through them ever so quickly. If you don't know me, my name's Corin Smith. I'm a salmon farm campaigner. That's what people like to call me. I'm not sure that's what I am, but that's what I do. We have Nick Underdown from Open Seas, Caitlin Turner from the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust, Ailsa, who works in marine habitat restoration, and most of you will know that lives here and lives across the loch with a salmon farm right in front of our house. We have Rachel Mulrennan, who's the director of, Scottish director from Wild Fish, and Matt Palmer, who's the farm salmon campaign manager at Wild Fish as well. Okay, so let's get going. I know the whole issue of salmon farming can feel entirely overwhelming at times, but I do have some good news, and we will be focusing on some of the negatives. But I don't want us to get too bogged down in that, because the industry, it doesn't feel like it, but it is a dead industry walking. Between climate change and falling consumption, we're starting to see the economics fail in the industry. We're starting to see those headlines come through. Companies are making losses, jobs are being lost, the industry is starting to consolidate in Scotland. We all know the environmental impacts are too much, but alone that was never going to be enough for this industry to disappear. But what we are starting to see, get my little pointer out here. It's difficult to overstate the importance of the headline here underneath. For those of you who don't know, DNB, Norway's Danske Bank, is the primary funder for salmon farming in Norway and ultimately in Scotland as well. And they are saying that the funders of the industry are saying that open net salmon farming has no future. They have to change to other forms of producing salmon if they want to have a future. So it's going to take a long time for the industry to disappear, but we do have a bright future to look forward to, but we're going to have to work to make that happen. It may have a long tail, and there's still a lot of damage to be done, so we must still keep pushing to make change happen as fast as possible. We have opportunities to encourage the Scottish Government to divert the funding that has been pushed into salmon farming over the years into other areas, to invest in industries that are genuinely sustainable and will offer us opportunity for generations to come, to create jobs for all of us and for local communities that don't require us to destroy the places where we live. And for me personally, and I'm sure for many of you, tonight we're going to talk about how we can ensure that the value that's being created in local communities, more of that is retained in our local communities, and that we have much more of a say in everything that's happening. The event, the public consultation down the way being a good example. So tonight's just the start. Yes, we're going to talk about some negative stuff, but I hope we'll spend some time talking about the future, why we love living here, what it is that's so special about our coastal communities and our coastal areas. And by way of a short summary, I'm just going to show you a short film, about 10 minutes, which was made by Wild Fish, which covers off the main issues, just to summarize and get us going.
The west coast of Scotland. It's wild. It's beautiful. And it's hiding a dark secret. Packed into cages are millions of salmon destined for our restaurants and supermarkets. But these are not the wild fish we imagine. These are farmed fish, and they suffer horrific overcrowding, creating ideal conditions for parasitic sea lice infestations and diseases. Sea lice are a huge problem for salmon farmers. They latch onto the salmon and eat their scales, exposing the flesh below. In the overcrowded cages, they multiply in great numbers. Virulent and often fatal diseases take hold. Pancreas disease, anemia, vibriosis, amoebic gill disease, fungus, infectious pancreatic moritella refractus, cardiomyopathy, hemorrhagic smoke syndrome. To try to counter the lice, highly toxic chemicals such as deltamethrin and azamethopos are poured into the pen in so-called bath treatments. A tarpaulin surrounds the pen to contain the powerful chemicals. But when the treatment time is up, the tarpaulin is withdrawn, and the toxic chemicals just flush out into the sea. Deltamethrin is so powerful that it can kill baby lobsters as far away as 10 kilometers. Surely this is no way to produce food for our plates. Even with such toxic chemicals, many farmed salmon are just too sick to make it to the fish processor. They die, and a whole industry exists to dispose of the millions of bodies. They are pumped up from the bottom of the pens into plastic crates and transported to the shore. This macabre industry is normally carried out away from prying eyes, but occasionally an accident occurs. And a hint of the full horror is revealed. They end up in incinerators or open pits. Not just one or two, but millions of fish each year. In 2019, over 10 million farmed salmon died of parasites and failed treatments before they could be harvested. This intensive farming has a terrible impact on the environment. The millions of caged salmon produce vast amounts of feces. They sink, along with uneaten food, to the seabed. What was once pristine seafloor is turned into a dark mat of bacteria that consume the food and the feces. Salmon farming is one of the most polluting industries in Scottish waters. Its organic waste alone is equivalent in volume to 2.5 million people's sewage. That's the same as almost half of Scotland's human population defecating straight into the sea. This is an ugly business. Little welfare for the salmon and scant protection for the environment. The sea lice don't just attack the farm salmon. They latch onto wild salmon and sea trout up to 30 kilometres from the cages. Wild salmon, something Scotland should be rightly proud of, are suffering from sea lice bred by farming. Many wild fish are now covered in lice. More than 10 or so sea lice will kill a young fish, and there's far more than 10 on this one. And it's not just young fish. Adult wild salmon can be so infested that they too die. But the horror story isn't over. Storms batter this coast. Anchor ropes break, cages collapse, and fish escape. The numbers are staggering. In 2020, over 100,000 fish escaped from just one company's nets. These domesticated fish are a wholly unnatural plague. Some wander into rivers where they breed with wild fish. That's very bad news for wild salmon, which will be less genetically fit, less likely to survive. And year on year, escape upon escape, the threat to wild salmon increases. But it really doesn't have to be this way. In 2018, Washington State banned open pen farming. British Columbia now recognises that open-pen salmon farming is not sustainable. Argentina too has banned open-pen salmon farming. Change is happening. And change can happen here too. Scotland could choose this better way. It could leave the horrors of open sea pens behind, step forward and be part of a better, greener future. Say no to open net salmon farming.
Well, it's a pretty good summary of the issues. Not the most joyful thing you'll ever see, but it is a pretty good summary. It often seems baffling, the success of salmon farming, open cage salmon farming in Scotland. And in terms of campaigning and how we approach it, it can seem overwhelming and it covers so many issues. So it's often been helpful, I think, to try and break it up into chunks to try and understand what's happening a bit better. And in terms of the success of salmon farming, it relies on two pillars. It sits atop two pillars. The argument that on the supply side is that salmon farming is good for Scotland, that there are socio-economic benefits that we all enjoy. And on the demand side, the argument and the story that the industry has told is that farmed salmon is good for you as a consumer. I'm going to take us through some of those arguments, and we can see what we think about them. So I'll crack on. I'm going to start on the supply side in terms of why is it that open cage salmon farming gets so much support in Scotland. I think anyone who's worked on the campaigns will constantly bump up against this sort of a complete free pass for open cage salmon farming in the face often of egregious breaches of regulations and things. Nothing really seems to happen. So why is that the way? Oh, my little animations. So first and foremost, this is the Scottish Government's position. This is the logic that drives the support for salmon farming in Scotland, that it's vital to our rural economy, that it generates lots of money and thousands of jobs. To summarise it, what you're told by the Scottish Government and the industry, and it's often difficult to distinguish between the PR of both, is that if salmon farming didn't exist in the Highlands and Islands, it would be an absolute crisis. It's not just us that are questioning that assertion. There are individuals with no skin in the game, but lots of experience. 3 former economists, some of whom have worked within the Scottish Government, whose job was to look at these kind of industries and make sense of them. They have considerable doubts about the information that we're being presented by the Scottish Government and by the industry. I wonder if anyone can guess what the red dot represents. The red rectangle, rather. The panel can guess as well if you want.
Astaxanthin.
What's that?
Astaxanthin.
No, it's not. No.
Okay.
Any guesses from the audience? Okay. Little red rectangle to scale against the big grey background represents the number of salmon farming jobs in the Highlands and Islands. These are the number of jobs on salmon farms. Now, these aren't my numbers. These are the numbers that the salmon farmers themselves offer, that is given to the Scottish Government and published in the annual salmon farm surveys. And that seems to sort of fly in the face that if salmon farming disappeared tomorrow, that the Highlands and Islands and coastal communities would fall flat on its face. Just to further emphasize that, what this chart shows is the number of jobs on salmon farms. Now, of course, there are jobs beyond salmon farms in the salmon farming industry, but the logic for salmon farming existing in coastal communities and the logic for the putting up with the environmental impacts is that coastal communities are wholly reliant, well, nearly wholly reliant on salmon farming jobs. That's the assertion. So that's why we sort of ignore the jobs in the Rosyth processing plant, for example. But there are jobs there. So this shows you the contribution, the number of jobs, and how they've changed. One of my favourite things, and it's kind of because I like graphs, but when you look at the graph, this graph, that when you see it produced by the Scottish Government and by the industry, it always seems to start here. You never get this bit. It always starts here and like that, and they put a trend line on it to sort of show a very one-sided view of what's happening with the jobs, when the reality is what you would imagine is that 30-odd years ago, salmon farming was pretty inefficient back then. It wasn't automated. There wasn't lots of technology. So in fact, there was there was quite a few jobs, whereas now you're getting lots and lots of industry, but lots of economies of scale, lots of automation. And actually, because these job totals stop at 2022, you will actually see dips over the last couple of years as jobs are starting to fall. But I thought also, just in terms of putting it in context of the Highlands and Islands, excuse me here. So over the last 30 years, so from 1992 to 2022, the salmon farming industry has created 500 jobs. That's what it's created. In the same time period, the number of jobs that have been created in Highlands and Islands region by other industries is 22,000. And again, it's not my numbers, these are the Scottish Government's numbers taken from various job surveys and things like that, skills surveys. Again, it's very simple, and we could argue the details if you want forever, but the reality is that salmon farming just is not a significant contributor. It's not an existential industry in terms of employment. Of course the jobs are important to the individuals who have them, and we should definitely be aware of that and recognise that, and be sympathetic to the fact that people will lose their jobs, but in terms of the Scottish Government's argument overall that if the industry was to disappear, we'd be in big trouble, I just don't think it stands up. And again, just to underline that, this is what these economists think about it, and I think crucially as well, one of the most important issues is that we rarely, if anything, hear about the opportunity costs. What jobs have been lost as a result of salmon farming growing, and what industries cannot exist in the future as a result of salmon farming existing now. It's just good economics. When you're making national policy, you want to know what the net benefit is, not what the gross benefit is. Another thing that we're often told is that Scotland wants salmon farming, that the jobs are really important, that we are a tiny minority here, that people don't agree with us. I was always curious about that, so with some support from Wild Fish, we went out and asked Survation, one of the most reputable polling companies in Scotland, the questions, not from the point of view of getting the answer we wanted, but just a baseline, where were we? Are we in the minority, are we not? This survey is a representative survey put together by Survation, so representative of Scotland as a whole. What's the opinion? That's the opinion. Secondly, in terms of the open cage business model, the most fundamental thing about open cage salmon farming is that they're allowed to freely dispose of their waste in the sea. That is the bit that makes them their profits. Because if you're a dairy farmer or a pig farmer or a chicken farmer, you've got to scoop up your waste and contain it and do something with it. You have to pay for that, right? Salmon farming doesn't pay for that at all, and that's the profit margin, generally speaking. So again, is it really vital? The assessment where it says it's worth 622 million, that is a gross assessment. It doesn't account for any negatives. And it's supporting just over 1,000 jobs on salmon farms, not thousands. And is it vital? But salmon farming is a good deal for some people, make no mistake. There is a whole ass pile of money getting made, but it's just not a lot of it is hanging around here. So, I mean, this is just so happens that this is an example from Maui, but you can see the numbers. This is what this is what essentially Maui pays in Scotland or paid in 2017 to pay for its own regulation, which you, as a polluter, you should do. And this is the total in terms of what Maui pays for renting the seabed from us as the stakeholders of the seabed, the owners of the seabed. Meanwhile, the chairman's trousering 15 million quid. I wonder, there's a lot of wealth created, and it's one of my favourite stats. So as a community, we're always told that by the Scottish Government that salmon farming is good for us. I wonder if anyone can guess, of all the many millions that are created, what percentage is actually retained in communities, largely via salmon farm salaries. Anyone want to hazard a guess of the percentage? 10%? What's that? 1%. Okay, spoiler alert. Well, it just so happens that we have the numbers. Now, I love numbers. A lot of people don't. I'm not going to go into the next slide in detail. And please don't take it too literally. It is based on real data, but it's to illustrate the overall issue in terms of the share of wealth. So this is an average salmon farm. There's 6 salmon farming companies in Scotland. 6 big ones, sorry. This is just an average of one of the biggest ones, who sells roughly 30,000 tonnes a year of farmed salmon. So that 30,000 tonnes will be sold for roughly in Marks and Spencer's and others for about 326 million. That creates a lot of wealth for a whole load of different people. But of that 326 million, how much is retained in Highlands and Islands region in terms of salaries, people on salmon farms? That's the numbers there. 1.2%. That's what we get in coastal communities. That's our share of the pie. For regions and for Scotland itself, that's it there, the blue and the green. That's the non-farm salaries. But then crucially, one of my favourite numbers down there is the Crown Estate levies. So this is what salmon farming companies pay us as a nation to lease the seabed from us in order to run their business. Now, if any of you are small business operators, most of you, I'm sure, will have mortgages and things like that. The proportion of either your salary, the wealth you generate, or as the proportion of sales in your little shop that you end up paying in rent or mortgages is not 0.2%. A business operating anywhere in Scotland, if you're a tenant farmer, your rent that you're paying your landlord is not 0.2%. So the deal that the Scottish Government has struck with the industry, where it's allowed to pay 0.2%, is a tiny fraction of what it should be paying to lease our seabeds. It should be 10 times that, I think. We'll maybe get into that. But what do we get as, what do we get? What do we get left with? There's a whole lot of money being generated, but what else do we get? And I think we're all familiar with the various statistics to do with the industry. We'll maybe come back to that. Again, what do our 3 favourite economists have to say? They're not so sure. The Scottish Government hasn't really looked at what the net benefit is. What should we be doing? This is what the economists think. We should be looking at cost-benefit analysis to understand what's the net benefit. It's what you would do if you're running your own business. You look at your P&L. You don't look at your top line and say, I'm selling all this stuff, it's great, I'm running a successful business. The measure is how much money you're making, what's the net benefit. So, with all of that in mind, we need to look at, if salmon farming is not going to be around, what are we going to do? What is the answer? I don't know what everyone else thinks. We'll get into it. But as a general point, I get a bit frustrated with just constantly dealing with the negatives, saying no, 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 and campaigning all the time. And it's quite nice to think about, what does the future look like? So I wanted to throw it open to the panel and see what everyone else thought about the numbers, what we think we could be doing in future, and also for you guys in the audience as well, for those of you living here, and Ailsa as well, I'm sure, has lots to say about life actually looking out over a salmon farm. What's that like? But I don't know, Ailsa, if you want to tell us a little bit about where you are, what's the view like, what's happening with the salmon farm.
And there's people sitting up there that are closer to the salmon farm than me, so you can add on to my experience. But because I've worked on salmon farms, I can't cast my eye over it and feel neutral ever, because it's not a neutral thing. I know what's happening. I know that the fish are suffering. I think if people saw sheep or cows going around with open sores, flesh missing from their bodies, it would impact them a lot more than somehow fish doesn't seem to inspire that same sympathy in people. Mm-hmm. But they feel the same as everything else, and that's a standard part of salmon farming.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the view out my bedroom window at the moment is during the night, it's all lit up in green, because they say they're lighting it for the fish's welfare, but they're lighting it to manipulate the fish's maturation so that its energy goes into flesh. So this is all about money, not about welfare.
Yeah.
And during the day at the moment, we can just hear power blasting from cannons feeding fish, which is preferable to a whaleboat, I might add, which they're also doing.
Okay. So the farm that's in front of your house was a Westeros fisheries farm. It was a really small wooden, relatively
yeah.
small traditional wooden farm, right?
It was Westeros were weird in that they were still using handmade cages that some people up there probably helped build and install. So they were like wooden boxes enclosing open blocks of polystyrene. So polystyrene has been eroding into Loch Broom since they set up in the late 70s or whenever it was. So when Maui took over, they said, oh, don't worry, we're going to clean up and put in this lovely new steel group, and we will not put a feed barge near your houses. And they moored the wooden pen away from the new one as they built it, which was hammered by winter storms. It was just all over the beaches. Again, there's this kind of weird buck passing at the moment, and Maui can say, well, we've just taken over, it wasn't us, even though they've owned the site for 2 years now, or 2 years plus.
Okay.
We get well boats, we get, in the summer, they have to constantly pump oxygen, so we can hear the generators, we can hear the compressors all night. And as an argument for the wellboat, they're like, we'll put the noisy stuff in the wellboat, but without talking about the noise the wellboat itself makes.
The feed barge, sorry.
Sorry, about the feed barge, yeah. And the wellboats would anchor under some of my friends up their houses. Thankfully, that seems to have stopped after complaints, and they're now anchoring further out the loch, probably bothering people at Scorrig now instead of
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it's noisy, it's industrial. I mean, I love watching boats, but not when they're doing what they're doing out there.
And critically, you said that so Maui bought the farm, or bought this company. They came in and said, we're going to clean up the farm and put a new metal, aluminium farm in, but we're not going to put a feed barge in. And now, it wasn't even a matter of months, and they sort of changed
last October, staff from Westeros, which is Maui, so they can't keep saying it wasn't us, came out and to, I think, probably 4 households of us all grouped together and said we will not be putting in a feed barge.
Right, and now they are putting in a massive one. Or they're trying to.
They're trying to.
Yeah, okay. And you have a bit of history with the salmon farming industry as well, so has it always, what's it been like in the past?
Well, when I moved here about 20 years ago, I worked for Westeros Salmon for about a year in freshwater and a bit at sea doing environmental management. And then I went to work for the tripartite working group, which is where I met Mr. Graham Stewart. That was counting lice on salmon farms, counting lice on wild fish, trying to establish links, trying to make the river owners get on better with the salmon farmers, which did not work.
Good luck with that.
Then I audited for Freedom Food because at that time I thought that welfare standards could be pulled up, which I no longer believe.
Okay, right.
So that's my history of salmon.
Okay, thank you. We'll throw to the audience in a minute. I'm sure some of you have got plenty to say about the current proposal, and it'd be really interested to hear from the people that actually overlook the farm and what you think about it. Nick, you've got a really extensive background in this. Maybe explain a bit what it is you do and how you come to the issue, and then your thoughts on, well, whatever you like, the economics, and maybe what you think about the future as well, what we could be doing.
Yeah, it's quite a lot to talk about.
You've got a minute and a half.
Yeah, I know. My background was I was a local reporter on the Isle of Arran. That's how I got interested in the salmon farming.
Yeah.
Because people were coming to me who were working on the farm, complaining about the conditions on the farm and the fact that there was stinking lorries going off in the Calmac ferry every few months over the summer, and there was no way to get that information out apart from via our newspaper on the island. So that's how I got interested in the issue. You know, the fact that you've raised about the levies for the Crown Estate, I mean, that is the basis of this in my view. We should be getting, for this damaging industry, a much better return from the seabed that they are leasing from the public estate. But I work for an organisation called Open Seas. We don't actually take a very proactive position on salmon farming issues. We focus primarily about the basically improved regulation of wild capture fisheries. And you used the phrase opportunity cost. There's just a massive opportunity cost that's going on right now with salmon farming. Many countries are seeing that there's just a direct conflict between investing in salmon farming and investing in well-managed wild capture fisheries. You know, if you manage the wild capture fishery for salmon better, we wouldn't need salmon farming. And I think that we are just, the whole set of government priorities is just skewed in completely the wrong direction. The reason why everyone wants and puts money in salmon farming is you can kind of get a dependable return from it, supposedly dependable return. And wild capture fisheries are much more complicated to manage. They require more regulation, more legislation. But if we spent a lot more time better managing our wild fish stocks, that is the opportunity we are missing right now. Government is looking all about salmon farming. If we spend that same money and time and effort in regulating our wild capture fisheries better, we would be generating more money, for our local communities.
Yeah. And what does that look like in terms of, I'm not asking you to commit to anything, but what does better regulation look like? What does development of that industry look like? Jobs numbers, are we talking 10? Is it a couple of creel fishermen, or is it hundreds of jobs? What does that look like? Bring it to life.
It is quite a regionally specific question you've asked there. So it does vary region from region to region. There was a really interesting study done about 2 years ago. Highland Council commissioned a bit of research all about the state of wild capture fisheries and the opportunities for the Highlands region. And it basically just, as a quick summary, highlighted that everything is consolidated to the East Coast. And we've got very little processing capacity on the West Coast to take advantage of the opportunities that actually the fish are there. They're not super well managed, but the fish are there, but they are being all basically landed directly and taken for processing in Peterhead and Fraserburgh. So there's an opportunity to invest in processing the West Coast, and that would definitely generate more jobs. I think the key measures required for better managing wild capture fisheries is spatial management of those fisheries, which there's very little of.
Yeah, okay. Caitlin, I see you nodding away in agreement there. Your Sustainable Inshore Fisheries, SIFT.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do with SIFT?
Yep.
And then I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Also, Caitlin studied marine biology at Stirling, wasn't it?
I did, yes.
And you had some interesting encounters with the subject of aquaculture there, quite literally.
To put it simply, I'll kind of start with that sort of way to segue into my journey, I suppose, to why I'm here. At Stirling, I chose to do marine biology. A funny place to choose to do marine biology, but anyway, I made that choice. And at that point in time, there was 2 separate degrees under the Institute of Aquaculture, which housed the marine biology degree and the aquaculture degree. Both at that point were undergraduate degrees. It wasn't until I was graduating and I looked at the programme that I discovered that only 2 students had chosen the aquaculture degree and the rest were all marine biologists. And after I graduated, Stirling now no longer offers aquaculture as an undergraduate degree, it's only a master's. However, we were made, despite being promised when we went to our open days and got all the nice uni selling itself to us, speeches, we were told that by our 3rd year of university we would divulge into either aquaculture or marine biology, whichever one we wanted to specialise in. The marine biologists found themselves doing a compulsory aquaculture degree that contributed to our final degree classification. And upon checking the degree now, it still has that compulsory aquaculture module. And I remember when I was doing it, they'd basically shown us a campaign film from an organisation that unfortunately I can't remember who, but it was an older film showing the impacts, similar to the film that we just saw there, showing the environmental impacts of salmon farming. And basically what my lecturers then wanted to do was to address the claims made in the film and basically rubbish them all. So I then pitched the question about the use of certain pesticides on the farm and how it was allowed despite the kind of cancerous sort of consequences of them. And I got told I was listening to too much Don Staniford, and I had no idea who that was at that point in time. And my question was never addressed. Come dissertation time, we got a list of potential topics we could choose. Only 3 of them were marine biology-centred topics. All the rest were aquaculture. All of the lecturers have an aquaculture background. You can see it on the Institute of Aquaculture's staff directory as well. So I was very much shoehorned into that and took it upon myself to try and teach myself a lot about marine biology and conservation, and came out of the other side with being kind of taking this stance. Obviously, I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't against open net salmon farming, but unfortunately it claimed some of my other marine biology peers from my degree, because they came out into the world and environmental jobs were very few and far between, and they couldn't get a foot in the door any other way. But these fish farms had so many jobs open to them, and they weren't even necessarily, the requirements weren't very stringent either. So they got lapped up. Even one of the girls that sat on my uni's Marine Conservation Society as my secretary now works for Maui. And that was the only way that they felt that they could get a foot in the door. And it's really sad. But coming back to SIFT and kind of what I do, I was nodding my head particularly at spatial management because that is a big SIFT line, talking about the marine space generally. And then when we're talking about kind of the losses of other industries, it also comes down to spatial squeeze, and where these big farms are being put in place is reducing the space for the fishers from coastal communities to actually go out and utilise that space. And obviously we've seen the kind of waste that gets put down on the seabed as well, and the impact that pesticides can have on commercially important species. That spatial management aspect comes into to figure out who can operate where and what the impact's going to be, to try and ensure that we lessen those sort of consequences of the industries coming into play.
And just so we're like just to dive into that a little bit, like we're talking about like locally owned businesses and individuals, right? Because the salmon farming industry is like, it tries to present itself as farmers for a start, but like as sort of quaint little organisations. But they're massive corporations. Like, we're not talking about swapping massive corporations for massive corporations, right?
No.
We're talking about
SMEs, small to medium
stewardship
enterprises.
for the local communities and allowing them to actually utilise their local marine space.
So even if it was worth a tenth, even if those industries were worth a tenth of salmon farming, because all the revenues stay here, it could still be worth more ultimately to the local area, right?
Yeah.
Or Nick, that logic, does that logic work?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not an economist to kind of go into it more in detail, but I think so. Yeah, exactly. But even when I'm thinking about like my friends that got hired into salmon farms, one of them's from Latvia that came over to Scotland, was based in Stirling with me. The other one's from Glasgow. So then you think about, well, how many people are you actually employing directly from the local community onto the farms, and how many are students that are coming up from Glasgow, Stirling, whatever else, because they can't get a job in marine biology anywhere else. Like, it's kind of benefiting those students and I guess getting them some kind of experience on their CV, but how it's big companies that are just getting other students from elsewhere, and how much is that directly coming back to the community itself?
So what does sustainable development look like 5-10 years? Like, what does that look like in terms of here? Like, just throw out some numbers. Like, how many jobs are we talking about? Like 500, 5,000? What do you think those fisheries recovered and better managed look like?
Help me out here. It's quite hard to scale as a national level, because it is, like, as Nick had said, really regional specific. But
there isn't a study that has shown that number, Corin. You know, there was a study done about almost 10 years ago now called Options for Change, which was assessing the kind of opportunities for different management scenarios for fishing. And so, like as Caitlin said, you know, if you're to spatially manage fisheries better, you would get more return from those fisheries.
Yeah.
But that is not it's not factoring in the sort of ground that's been lost to those fisheries to the proliferation of salmon farming.
Okay.
I mean, that calculation's not been done, but you know, I think some areas were shown that actually that spatial management wouldn't actually generate lots more jobs. It would just maybe have an environmental benefit.
Okay.
But in some areas it was very significant, you know, like it was hundreds of jobs, and certainly over a 20-year timescale it was like tens of millions of pounds.
Okay, good. Rachel, Matt, I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that, what we've seen?
Yeah, I just have like one short point, just that I think, like, obviously we're talking about like what could the future look like. I think it's really important to think we need to decide what the future will look like, because all the signs are pointing towards salmon farming not being here in the next 10 years. So I think like everything that we're seeing with like warming waters and increased mortalities, I think it's really imperative that actually we do move to the future as soon as we can. And I think this is one of the reasons why, for instance, the Scottish Government should be taking a broader look at how people are employed and how development works on the West Coast, because this is not an industry that's going to be around in 10 years' time. And it's also not an industry that's going to care when it has to leave. It will just pick up and it will leave, because it operates internationally and it can go elsewhere. So I think that's why it's really important to have these conversations now. And yeah, really interested to hear what people think maybe now or after the event as well.
Sure. I'd like to throw it open to the audience if anyone's got any thoughts. In particular, I'd like to hear from, well, I'm going to ask the Ullapool Sea Savers to have a thought over the next couple of minutes. You guys are going to be the ones who are looking for jobs in the future. Many young people in rural areas, not just in coastal communities, are having to leave rural areas to go and find those jobs elsewhere. But it would be great if we could just offer those jobs in coastal communities and in rural areas. So have a think about, like, what jobs do you want in the future? Like, this is your area, it's your future. What would you like to see developed in this area? There's no limit and no restriction on what can happen here. So have a think. It'd be good to hear from you guys. Other members of the audience, what are your thoughts on anything we've seen over the last 40 minutes or so? AGS.
Just one small point on spatial management, which Nick and Caitlin have both emphasised. You mentioned the area that is taken up by the actual salmon farms. I think possibly even more important is the chemicals and how they spread out from the farms 10, 20, 30 kilometres. So in terms of the impact on sustainable coastal fisheries, that is really the vital point.
The footprint's much bigger than just the physical footprint,
exactly.
Is what you're saying. Yeah, good point. Who's here that actually looks over the Corrie salmon farm? Okay, grand. Let's pass the mic to the lady there, Cal, if we can, if she's happy to tell us about it and what she thinks. If we can get your name, if you're happy to give it,
sure, yeah.
And just give us an overview of like what your situation is.
Okay, I'm Leslie, and I live right opposite the salmon farm. We cannot go anywhere on our property and not see the salmon farm. When Westeros were operating it, it moved every 2-3 years.
All right.
So it moved up and down the loch. At the time, they were saying it was giving the seabed a chance to recover. But I understand latest legislation, they're not allowed to move now. So it's been in this position for about 12 years. Westeros, with their hand feeding, were far less intrusive in our lives than Maui have been since they've taken it over. The well boats are our biggest bugbear. They can roll up at 11 o'clock at night and not leave till 3. And it's like having a helicopter right outside your bedroom window.
Okay.
And you get roving lights that go backwards and forwards across your bedroom.
Wow.
You know, it's awful. And in the latest application for a bead barge, they're saying that well boats will only operate for 20 days a year. So therefore it's acceptable because it's not a nuisance. It's a nuisance to me.
Yeah.
And my immediate neighbours as well.
Okay.
So it's been very difficult.
What would you like to see happen?
I'd like to see it blown up.
Okay, so I'll rephrase that so we can put you in, or you can rephrase that so we can put you in the film without getting you arrested.
Okay.
Leslie, what would you like to see happen?
Right, well, we've made a proposal to Maui to not have a feed barge. We have an alternative for them to put the generators. They're going to buy electric ones, which are a lot quieter. At the moment, they operate 2 road generators, which are very noisy. We want adequate shielding on them. Put them on a pontoon. You could put a low-level building on there. You could have all your cameras for your underwater fishing, underwater feeding, rather. And we wouldn't be getting microplastics into the loch, and we wouldn't get these organic pollutant particles associated with microplastics.
Okay.
We haven't heard back from them yet. So,
right. So you're offering a practical solution for a more tolerable form of salmon farming.
To us,
for yourselves, yeah. But ultimately, you're not a fan, right?
No, I would like to see it stopped completely.
Okay.
Personally, but we have to live with it at the moment, and this was an alternative that could be acceptable to both parties.
Okay.
I don't think they'll take it up. I think they'll push for the feed barge. They've invested too much in that already.
Yeah.
So far.
Thank you very much. Same again. Are you happy to tell us the other lady that put your hand up? Yeah. Yeah. You could just give us your name and what you're
I'm Lucy, and I live at Leckmullen Farm opposite the salmon farm. And I'd say probably in about the year 2000, I started doing beach cleaning for the MCS, and I started picking up things like shower gloves and syringes, which were even more disturbing.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
and
okay.
It was quite dangerous. And so I got hold of Gilpin, who ran West Ross Salmon at the time, and we did have a good conversation about that. He sent people out to come and clean the litter. And I did campaign for quite a long time, but eventually ceased my campaigning to some extent because I felt that West Ross Salmon was making active plans towards mitigating their pollution and also providing jobs in the local community. I feel that that has changed now. And I think if we look back to what salmon farming originally was, in the 1960s, they put a suggestion out for Shetland that it could be salmon crofting on land. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be much more sustainable. And as a farmer, I produce livestock, and I don't have license to put unmitigated waste with no consequence onto the land or at sea. So I think all farmers should be treated in the same way.
Here. Yes, the gentleman with glasses, because he's closer. Sorry, we are going to have to move on pretty quickly. We'll take a couple more and then we'll go. I would like to get, if anyone's got any suggestions for like industries of the future in Ullapool, that'd be great to hear. I don't want to force it too much, but
I just had a quick question really about eating salmon. And
okay.
I had read somewhere that the food industry actually told us we shouldn't be eating more than 2 portions of salmon a year because of the chemicals in it. It was actually bad for us.
That's a question about consuming salmon. I'm going to bookmark that and we'll come back to it. We'll answer it later, okay? And I think there's a lady here, Cal.
Hi, my name's Robin. I have lived in the area for nearly 30 years, and I'm also on loch side, so we don't directly see the sea farm, but we see lights and we get some noise, but not as bad as people who are immediately near it. But one of the things that's happened, we've known West Ross Salmon for a long time. My partner worked for them as an engineer in the 1990s, so knows the Bradley background and the sort of stuff that Gilpin Bradley is head of, I think, is it Scottish Salmon organisation, the line that he has taken over the years. But one of the things about Corrie is they used to be able to raise fish there to maturity and harvest. They can't anymore. And they also need to bubble oxygen into the water. So it is actually becoming an unsustainable site. And they replaced what was there before, the old fish farm, with 14 cages, quite large cages. But 4 of those are now going to go to Ardmere, so they're actually reducing it again. So the viability of that site is really under question.
Yeah, in its current form.
Yeah. And the other thing is, like when you cruise up and down the west coast, as we do from time to time, you just see these vast Norwegian boats or Faroese boats coming up and down, and the amount of money that's pumped into the industry. And I know that the Scottish Government puts quite a lot of money into fish farming as well, because you can see that the grant system and stuff. It's just sort of quite mind-boggling. But wherever you go, all the sort of little inlets and places have got bits of fish farm either abandoned there or placed there. And it's actually very difficult for people who are cruising for leisure to find places for mooring. So that's one thing that seems to have become fairly uncontrolled development. And the other thing is, as far as, because my partner's a creel fisherman, the other issue about that is that the cost of getting into commercial fisheries is enormous because of the regulation that comes from the Scottish Government, and it's also extremely badly regulated. It's a lot of it's we just feel that fisheries, the Scottish Government has been captured by mobile gear people, trawlers, dredgers. And they still can trawl in what is the marine protected area in the local area.
Okay.
They can't dredge. So there could be some openings for development, but the cost for young people to get into those sorts of fisheries is actually really difficult.
Okay, thanks.
But there is potential there, yeah.
Good. Sea Savers, have you got any inspiration for us? What jobs do you want? Any thoughts on that, or will we come back to you? Yep, we've got one. Cal. Give us your name and where you come from.
Hi, I'm Maya. I've lived in Ullapool almost my whole life. And as a young person, me and almost all my peers get asked all the time, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you're older? And obviously living in a small town like Ullapool, where fishing is, what Ullapool's built on, it genuinely surprises me, like when watching all my friends get asked that, how many people go, oh, I don't know. They just don't know. And that's obviously totally fine. But I think a large issue within the community is it's a community so built on fishing, but at all our careers fairs, the only form of sea-based careers that gets promoted to the whole younger peer group of the high school is fish farms. That's the only stall, pretty much. There's Tanara, but then that's it. It was Westeros originally, but now I think Maui come quite often. And I think that's such a big issue within our community, is because fishing is massive within our community. But I can think of one young person that plans to stay within the village and keep fishing and work on fishing boats, but everyone else wants to go do other stuff. But they just have never really been, like, I have a friend who's lived here, like multiple friends who've lived here their whole lives, just never even been on a boat, which is mad to me, really, because I have quite a few relatives that work on boats. That's
great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to move on, if that's all right. If you have any questions or points, you can save them. Hopefully we'll get to them. We'll get enough time at the end. Right. So, salmon farming, we're talking about the local community. It can feel like you're in a pressure cooker, like it's all happening here, it's all about us, it's all on us to make change, and it can feel very overwhelming. But it's good to look around and see what else is going on. And one of the reasons we're here tonight, is to say to the local community, you're not on your own. There are organisations in the UK who are here to help you and support you. Sometimes they need a bit of a kick in the arse to make them do that, but there are organisations that do that. But there are also lots of organisations around the world who are, and individuals and places who are facing exactly the same issues with exactly the same companies. So, you will be told, often we're told by the Scottish Government and by the industry, it's just you guys, it's no one else, but that's not true. And you can see the number of organisations, individuals, groups around the world who are opposing salmon farming and opposing it unequivocally. They want open cages out of the seas and no questions asked. And I've got a message from one of those organisations. It just so happens to be as far away as you can possibly go, which is Tasmania, on the other side of the world. A short message about their experience and what they're facing with salmon farms. This is Peter George, who's in Tassie.
Hello, greetings from Port Signet, down in deepest southern Tasmania. I'm Peter George from Neighbours of Fish Farming, and I'm here to share the sense of outrage that everybody feels when they become the unwitting and reluctant neighbours of huge salmon feedlots full of deformed and diseased fish that are polluting our waterway and making our lives actually that much more difficult, because we're losing our beautiful clean waterways. We have to suffer the noise, we have to suffer the light, and we just suffer the sense that our marine life is slowly being destroyed. In Tasmania, they shoot seals to using bean bags weighted with lead to frighten the seals off. They dump antibiotics straight into the waterways by the tons. They put chemicals into the waterways. The whole thing is an out-of-date, outmoded system of supposed farming. And we're outraged by it, and we fight against it all the time. And that's why we're saying eating salmon is killing Tasmania. And eating salmon is killing Scottish waters as well. So we stand by you, we stand with you. We are part of a global fight against this awful industry. So keep up the fight. We're with you all the way.
Good old Peter. T-shirts are available on his website, apparently. We got a lot more messages of support, a lot, from all over the place, from Norway, Argentina, Canada, the US, but we just don't have time to play them. We'll try and make them available to you at some other point in time, but there are lots of people out there who are thinking about you guys, who are sharing in the same issues.
Corin, could I ask, who are the other organisations in Scotland that you were listing on the screen there, out of the 8?
Oh yeah, I can get them to you at the end if that's okay, because I can't remember them offhand. I was going to say something controversial there, but I better not. So we go back to the 2 pillars that underpin the salmon farming industry. We've had a look at the socio-economic stuff. Consumption, the demand, farm salmon is good for you. Obviously that is interrelated with the socio-economic argument, because if there's no demand and no consumption of salmon, well, the economic issues fall flat in their face. So in terms of thinking about what we're doing about farmed salmon and who's doing what, because we shouldn't all be doing everything all of the time, it's really useful to have organisations who are focused solely on the consumption side of things. Oh, my old animations are getting in the way here. Oh, I'd forgotten we have this. So who's eating farmed salmon? We know all of the issues with it, but there are a lot of people eating farmed salmon. So I'm going to very rapidly zip through some answers to that question. Who's eating salmon around the world? Where does the salmon that is produced in Scotland go? You can see where it goes. So the vast majority is going, or the biggest single market is France, then America, and then they fall off pretty quickly. China, Poland, Ireland, and then it falls off. One of the lines that we're always fed is farmed salmon's really popular. The demand is growing and it's getting bigger and bigger. If those of you at the back can't see it, the most important number is this one, which shows that actually the amount that's being exported is falling. That is the objective measure of demand. If you're selling less, demand is falling, right? But what the industry will often say is, well, look, they point you to the value number, because at the end of the day, that's what the Scottish Government care about, because it contributes, in theory, to GDP. And yes, it's up 7%, but bear in mind what the inflation rate has been. So the growth in value does not even account for inflation over the same period. So demand, I mean, it's obviously not falling by as much as we want, but demand is falling, and what it's certainly not doing is increasing by 10 or 20% every year. So don't believe the hype on that one. Where are we? Come on. Where's it being sold in the UK? Half of the farmed salmon that's produced in Scotland is sold in supermarkets in the UK. This is who sells it. Tesco's, etc., etc., etc. Marks and Spencer's sell a lot. I'm not really going to go into this. Supermarkets sell farmed salmon, we know that, and they sell a lot of it. Who's eating it? This exceptionally complicated table I'll try and make sense of. You can ignore everything from this side to the right. Well, for the moment you can. If you want to look at it later on, you can. Who's eating salmon? So it's pretty technical, but I'll try and make it straightforward. We're often told that farmed salmon is going to solve world hunger. Like, that's one of my favorite lines. Yes, we're going to take all the fish from the waters around Somalia, Angola, and less developed countries in Africa, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it into whiskey smoked salmon and then sell it back to you. That's apparently what's going to happen, according to the lobbyist for the salmon farming industry. But what we actually see is that farmed salmon, fresh farmed salmon, which is its cheapest form, costs roughly 16, 17 pounds a kilo at the moment. It's consumed in the majority by people who are earning above the average salary in the UK. When we go down through this chart, one of the other really important table, rather, one of the other really important statistics is the age makeup of who's consuming farmed salmon. So you can see over 70% of farmed salmon is being consumed by older demographics. And that's good news, because what's not happening is consumption is not being replaced by younger people. So the demand is going to fall off rapidly. It's going to die off eventually. Some interesting stats there. Oh, right, here we go. We're on to the good stuff. So there are organizations who are leading specific campaigns to drive down consumption of farmed salmon. And Wildfish is the singular organization in that field, making more strides and placing more emphasis on that than anybody else with their off-the-table campaign. Rachel and Matt are going to walk us through that in a minute or two. But just before they do, we're going to play their promo video, which just lasts a minute, just to explain what the scheme is and how it works.
Wasn't already enough that salmon farming relies on wild caught fish for feed, 1 in 4 of the salmon on these sites will die. In part, this is due to disease and parasitic sea lice, which can spread and in some cases kill wild salmon. This industry is polluting the waterways with antibiotics, pesticides and toxic chemicals. This is a fundamentally unsustainable farming practice.
At Wilson's, people expect the food to be delicious, they expect it to be beautiful, but most importantly they expect it to be sustainable. And that is why we don't serve farmed salmon on the menu.
Rousing stuff. Rachel is going to take us through it. We're going to have to do a little technology and a bit of a shuffle here. Or do you want me to?
You're going to go through it.
You want me to move you around the site?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's just 2 pages to show, really.
Okay.
But
I'll hand over to you to. What is going on here? Oh.
I can also just talk around it. We don't have to go onto the site.
No, it's fine. The site will work fine. If you want to introduce it and talk around it, I can start to get the website up.
Sure. So yeah, probably also useful to give a bit of background to why we started the Off the Table campaign. So at Wildfish, we have been campaigning for probably 2 decades to try and curb the negative impacts of the salmon farming industry in Scotland. And really we're getting nowhere in terms of having real success in getting awareness at the political level, but that action has just been out of reach, I think. And we identified a couple of years ago that actually we needed to bring more people into the campaign. We needed to raise awareness of the issues around salmon farming beyond Scotland. Obviously, Scotland is an important part of the campaign, but also UK-wide and now also internationally as well. So the campaign is a hospitality-focused campaign. It's asking chefs and restaurants to commit to taking farmed salmon off their menus. And through doing this, we hope to raise awareness of the negative environmental, but also welfare and sustainability issues with the industry. And a key part of the campaign as well is that we are working kind of in a coalition or in a partnership with lots of other NGOs. So we have about 60 organisations that are supporting the campaign, and these bring a whole wealth of expertise on all the different issues associated with salmon farming. So at Wildfish, we are focused on the environmental impacts, but we have NGOs that look into the sustainability issues with the feed and the welfare and pesticide use and all of that expertise that we can draw on. So this is the directory of supporters for the campaign now.
On the partners, why do you partner with other NGOs and just not do it all yourself?
So I think the partnering So the partnering, I think we actually see as being really a crucial part of the campaign, because there are so many issues associated with salmon farming. It's not just the environmental issues, even though they are a huge part of the piece, but you also have the welfare issues and sustainability issues, pesticide use, and we really identified that actually it's through working with partners who have expertise in those areas we can appeal to not just more chefs and restaurants, but also more consumers through the chefs and the restaurants too.
Okay.
And just to jump in there, really, what we're starting to see now within the chef and hospitality community and within the general public as well is that we're not talking about the issues as isolated like issues or isolated impacts. We're talking about them within the context of a changing planet. So we're talking about them within the context of the loss of our wild fish or the pressure that we're seeing on our wild Atlantic salmon. We're talking about them within the context of increasing food insecurity in terms of wild caught fish for feed. We're talking about them in context of the environmental and animal welfare impacts as well. And I think it's really important that we draw on not only our own expertise, but the expertise of our NGO and community partners to do that. And a big part of that is the lived experience of the individuals that live near the farms, like lots of the people that are here today, but also the information that we have out there to show that this is a fundamentally unsustainable food production system. It's having a massive impact on our planet, and chefs and restaurants are taking it off of the table for a number of different reasons, the ones that are personal to them, but also within the context of us needing to change our food systems to ones that are more sustainable long term.
So how do we get involved with off the table? Like if people hear, like either as consumers or I see there's lots of restaurants, even one from Ullapool. So how have these guys happened to be on it? Like how can people get involved with off the table if they want to? Let us know about that.
A good question. So I think we launched the campaign at the end of last year, end of 2022, and we have been predominantly focusing on chef and restaurant outreach and engagement, which we've been doing mostly through social media or word of mouth and recommendations and personal introductions. But we are definitely looking to increasingly reach the consumer base. And I think we see it as a bit of a chicken and egg. So actually bringing on those chefs and restaurants initially is what is going to raise awareness to start with the consumers. But we are looking to reach consumers more directly as well. As you say, in terms of what people can do just now to get involved, supporting the restaurants that are supporting the campaign is obviously a start. But you also have, if there's a restaurant that you go to often that you think shouldn't be serving salmon or doesn't serve salmon and should be on the directory, definitely give them our information, put them in touch with us, and information sharing on social media as well. We have a whole wealth of social media tiles and suites, mostly that Matt has put together. We found these to be a really effective way of spreading that information as well.
And I think ultimately, to follow on from that, it's about education, and it's about opening up these discussions around the real reality. So it's taking the narrative away from what we're being told by the Scottish Government, what we're being told by these multinational corporations about, the claims of sustainability, claims of, pristine lochs, etc. And we're showing them the real reality in terms of what's happening underneath the water and the impacts of picking up that pack of salmon from the supermarket or serving it in the restaurant. So it's empowering people with the information to really make the decisions for themselves and ultimately use the power of what they're consuming to push towards ending open net salmon farming and pushing for more sustainable alternatives within our communities and within our food systems as well.
And it's also super powerful when you have a chef who obviously lives for food and knows a lot about food, knows a lot about provenance, actively saying, I'm not going to serve this, like, this is not in line with my ethos, this is not a good product. And I think that's ultimately the message that we want to get across as well, both to consumers and ultimately the Scottish Government.
It'd be good if you could get Great British Bake Off to sign up.
Yeah, working on it, don't worry.
You keep cranking out farm salmon dishes every now and again. Thank you for that. It'd be good to spend more time on it, but we are pushed for time. This slide here, I wanted to kind of throw it open to the audience, to the panel. There is, every time we choose to eat food, and, there is definitely not, we shouldn't be like pursuing a holier than thou approach on this because everything has an impact, right? It's just about weighing weighing those choices. But I wonder, in the big picture, in terms of food, who do you feel has the greatest power to make change happen? Where do you think that we can really affect a big change through consumption? Any thoughts on the panel?
I know the answer, so I'm not going to say.
I've seen your slide as well, yeah.
Audience? At the back there. Gentleman with the silver hair and the glasses.
My name is Roddy. I come from the Black Isle. So I strongly object to what I call the caged salmon farming. Don't call it salmon farming, it's caged salmon industry, that's what it is. What I question, I'd like the panel to have a view on this. We're talking about chefs saying, no, we won't do it, but the consumer will look around and say, the RSPCA, they condone it. And there's, I don't know how many other award schemes there are that sanction salmon farming. But surely these people are totally conflicted because they're making their money out of the licenses that they grant. It's not an even playing field. These people are totally conflicted. The RSPCA, Chris Packham, the president, said he wanted it to be banned. I think one of the best ways of attacking the industry is to get one of these award schemes to actually back off and say, no. Can you imagine the impact that would have?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, it'd be significant. Ailsa, you work in that area. Any thoughts on the schemes? I guess to play devil's advocate, people would say, it is a scheme that's trying to make the lives of salmon better. Is it? Can it?
I don't think it can. I think if you read the handbook, it looks like they're doing a lot of things differently, but from auditing over time, I realised they just had to learn how to pass the audit. So there can be fish dying. I'm just wondering if I'll get sued at some point.
You won't.
There can be mass mortalities taking place, but as long as it's been reported the correct way, written up in the paperwork the correct way, acknowledged, then they're still in the scheme. And mass mortalities are becoming more and more common. And I would see, this is hard. Well, you'd see farms breaking the same rules over and over again and staying in the scheme. And that's when I realised it wasn't actually changing the welfare at all for the better. And they talk about better stocking densities and things, but when there's that many migratory fish rammed in a pen, I don't think the stocking density is really the issue. It's too many.
Sure. Quickly, if that's okay.
The name of the species is the Atlantic salmon, and as far as I'm concerned, they should be in the Atlantic, and they shouldn't be in cages on the west coast of Scotland.
Sure, I think, that's a good point. James? Oh, sorry, one right at the back.
Sorry, hi. My name's Nicola. I just kind of, when I come to things like this, sometimes I just get overwhelmingly depressed because I'm not expecting change basically to happen. And I think from my perspective in terms of the question, who do you think has the greatest power to make changes we want to happen? And obviously we as individuals have the greatest power and we have the responsibility, but what is it that influences us and assists us to make those right decisions? And just now, for me, nothing stands in a vacuum. Where we're talking about salmon farming, in my mind, I'm a social welfare solicitor, and so poverty and education is intrinsically linked with every decision and choices that people make or that they think they have or they don't have. And so, in terms of, sorry, I'm getting to my point, in terms of salmon farming or caged Atlantic salmon, It's like all the industries are on the race to the bottom, whether it's fast fashion, whether it's food, whether it's poultry, whatever it is, they're all in the race to the bottom in terms of price, because that's what it appeals to the consumer in respect of whatever it is that they want to buy. And now society doesn't understand the significance of cost that should be attached to a product that's environmentally friendly, that's ethical, that's blah, blah, blah. And so I guess... and while you're working with other NGOs, etc., like the off-the-table people, I think like sometimes we look at things in vacuums to the area specific, rather than like how do you get people to realise that paying, I don't know, £1.20 or £2 for salmon it's not sustainable, it's not acceptable, and we shouldn't be doing it from a wage paying element to the people who work within the industry, etc., etc.
It should have a full environmental cost.
Yeah. But I guess it's just like, sorry, I'm forgetting what my actual point was now. But basically, in society, we always want everything cheaper. But years and years ago, society's proportion of wages that went on food was much, much higher than it is now. But it's how do you change that? So sorry, I know I don't have a specific point. I guess for me, it's kind of circular. Everything
Sure.
is attached and related, so it's not.
Yeah, it's big,
it's not a
like,
standalone
and
product.
it's not helpful to think about it in isolation.
Yeah.
Well, you can't, because it is
Yeah.
big and it's all interconnected. Back row, Arwen, I think.
Just to further her point more,
Can we get your name?
Oh,
and
hi,
who you
I'm
are?
Arwen. I've lived in Ullapool my whole life. To further her point more, I think, especially being a young person nowadays, it's so easy to just ignore what's happening because it's right in front of you what you're buying, and you want to go for the cheapest option because everything's so expensive. And it's easy just to go for what's in front of you and block out what you know is probably quite sinister, what's going underneath. And I think for me, was getting that education on what's actually behind that changed my view.
Yep.
Whereas I think a lot of people around me don't know what's going on, and like especially here where you would think, oh, everyone must know what's going on in school. We don't. A lot of people around us have no idea what's going on. A lot of my friends have no idea. And I just think that education for young people about this kind of thing would have a big impact, and visually seeing what's happening, how it's affecting them, would have a big impact, and it's just not being addressed enough.
Good, I agree, yeah, good point. I think, Janice.
I'm Janice. I've lived in Ullapool for the past 10 years. I just wanted to raise a point about Highland Council and the school dinners. I've just checked with these guys, and there's still salmon on the school dinner menu. And on your statistics up there was a lot of salmon being eaten by children who have no say in it. And it's not just about feeding them this toxic food, which is wrong, obviously, but there's also an element of normalization going on there. It becomes normal to eat fish, which is good. Fish is healthy, right? But this is farmed salmon, and they're not given any kind of education, like Arwen was saying. There needs to be education around how harmful this is.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And sorry, it just reminded me that the gentleman across from you asked that question about what are the consumption guidelines for farmed salmon? And there are consumption guidelines, and they're based, well, I'll try and do this as quickly as I can. The consumption guidelines for farmed salmon, Food Standards Scotland will say in inverted commas oily fish, because they won't say farmed salmon, is 2 portions, the guidance is no more than 2 portions of farmed salmon a week, particularly for women, girls, children, anyone who might have children in the future. And the reason for that is because of the PCB and dioxin levels that are found in farmed salmon. They're toxins that the body can't process, and they build up, and they cause health issues, which I'm not going to go into. So that is the guidance. That's not scare stories from environmentalists or anything like that. But that is the guidance. So yeah, it's interesting that farmed salmon is being served to kids in school, because it should come with some kind of guidance. And to Arwen's point about people knowing a bit more about it, that might be like an entry point. I think any more questions on that? Okay, James.
Back to the RSPCA. They publish on their website the list of names of the Aquaculture Standards Committee. And if you analyse, they've got also their affiliations next to the names. The representation of the salmon farming industry on that committee is 89%. I started doing this because of looking into the Soil Association, who back in 2017 or something was about 57%, something like that. But it included the two of the directors of the organic salmon farming company that were applying for permission to put salmon farms in off the coast of Skye, and are doing so at the moment. And the CEO is still on the RSPCA Aquaculture Standards Committee.
Yep.
It's a bit fishy.
It's a little bit circular as well, yeah. I'll take one more point, yeah, if that's all right.
Alistair's my name. But there's a comparison with when they were doing all that battery chicken farming. That was all in the news and the TV and the media. Mm-hmm. That was all stopped, but it's just the same, but at sea.
Yeah, I think so, but it's hidden away, right? Aye. Because it's hard for television crews to get at it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think you're right.
Well, they can get to it, but they're not overly interested.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're certainly not on a lot. That's for sure. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna keep going if that's all right. If we've got more time at the end, we can potentially do more questions. I just wanted to come back to this because as what was I going to say? As a salmon farming geek, maybe or it's someone who's interested in the minutiae. It is, and you're looking for upside and positives. It's difficult to overstate the importance of these headlines, because this is not campaigners, it's not campaign-led, it's not NGO-led. It's the biggest financiers of the salmon farming industry who are being unequivocal. You know, traditional net pen needs to move away to other options. Now, I'm not an advocate of the other options, but it's saying open cage doesn't have a future. It's also saying that, you know, public opinion in Norway is moving away from salmon farming, and that's what we saw in the polling data that I showed you earlier on. And also to the point that everything we do, it can often feel kind of microscopic and minuscule, and it doesn't really make a difference, but it does all add up. It does make a difference. And everything you do today will resonate, continue to resonate down the years, and may come back and will be helpful. And so just wanted to point out this little headline here, Sir David, and that's referring to David Attenborough. It was a Daily Mail article which goes back to 2019, and it's not me that's pulled this in. This is an article recently from just last week or so. They are quoting, in terms of, you know, the negative public opinion, they are attributing it to Sir David Attenborough engaging on this issue, saying that salmon farms are a massive problem and an existential problem for wild salmon. So the efforts you make today are worth making. You never know when they're going to come back and be positive. We're getting close to the end, but I think it's one of the messages that we're wanting to kind of really push, and for the Scottish Government to really take on board, is this reality that open cage salmon farming is coming to an end. It is ending. It doesn't matter how much the government wants to prop it up, and the variety of reasons, maybe not wanting to kind of concede defeat or having failed to achieve what they wanted to. They need to wake up to the reality, and they need to manage the transition away as the industry starts to fail. They have a responsibility to the people who work on salmon farms. They have a responsibility to make sure that those people are not abandoned, which they will be if it's left to people like Maui, who have, you know, 10, 20 times their operation in Norway. You know, Scotland is just an outlier. When it's time for Maui to pull up stumps, they'll pull them up and take off, and the employees will be abandoned. We also have a responsibility, you know, if we want a particular future, we need to take responsibility for that and make that happen and start having these conversations. And that's, in a large part, what this meeting is about. You know, we cannot abdicate that responsibility entirely to the Scottish Government. And I think there's lots of opportunity for us to think about that and do some more and take control of our own destiny. But I know it's overwhelming. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult to keep the motivation up. So to finish, if you're struggling for motivation and if you forget what it is, why you're doing what you're doing and why you're fighting the good fight, why our coastlines are such special places, why they mean so much to us, why it is we all choose to live where we do, we have a relatively short message from some people you might know, and it's from the people whose future really is at stake in all of this. So we're going to close on this short film. Immediately after this, there's the event taking place, the Maui event taking place down in the town. Anyone who wants to go and attend that, some of us are going to go down. We're going to move out and head down there pretty quickly. So all that remains is to just again thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy this short film.
If you want to just give that a big old clap for me.
So sorry, what do I say?
You don't need nothing to start with, just lift that top bit up, just clap it down.
Oh, I've always wanted to do this. Action.
Alright, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, well, I've never done that before.
Maybe you know how to do that. Come on. Yeah, but it's been a while.
Like where we are today, like just Ullapool. My name's Callum Leon. I'm 13 years old and I'm in Ullapool.
Our cultural heritage here cannot be separated from the marine resources and the sea. There wouldn't be an Ullapool if it weren't for the sea and the shore and the fishing and all the other industries that have grown up here.
I've fallen in love with the community here. I love the people. I really value being part of that community.
My favourite thing about the sea is all the colours. You can't really see all the colours from above the water because there's like lots of seaweed. But if you just go underneath the seaweed and underneath all the murky water, you find yourself in like a whole new world.
When I see the sea, it makes me feel happy, fresh and excited.
We quite often see otters just down by our house and bringing their fish up onto the rocks and just eating a window view of them. It's pretty cool.
It's an amazing connection with the wildlife.
When I was little, my dad used to take me out on boat trips. We would pull up creels and I've always really enjoyed it.
Most people like going out there and escaping from the world because it's so different. It's like your own little space and it feels really nice and calming.
I've been paddleboarding just out from my house around there and the bioluminescence was incredible, and then we were just lying and just looking up because it was a really starry night, and then we just heard and there was porpoises like 15 meters away.
What is it I love about it? I just never want to live anywhere else.
I've spent a lot of time on the water around Scotland. I've paddled around the whole coast of Scotland, and time again I come across fish farms. My gut reaction to seeing them, especially knowing what I know about them and the environmental harm that they cause, is that they shouldn't be there, that this is this beautiful, pristine ocean environment which is home to so many ecosystems and creatures that we care for and that we love and that we spend time protecting, and then it's allowed that a big polluting organism is able to be put right in the middle of that. And for me, it's not so much about the way it looks, it's more about everything that comes with that.
Often you feel a bit powerless knowing that there's something that's happening to the sea and it always feels beyond your control.
Quite isolating if you read the news and then you go to school and nobody's speaking about it, and it affects everyone, but only some people care, and the people that don't care don't seem to think it affects them.
It feels that then they're just like not going to take in any advice, and they're just going to keep on doing what they're doing without caring.
People know the effect, but almost want money over protecting the birds and the wildlife. And so the fact that we could do something, but we don't because we want money, I find that quite upsetting.
For the things that people are doing to the ocean, I feel sad about it.
It's quite intimidating, knowing that all this heavy machinery is coming in to do all this dirty work.
They're right to be alarmed, quite frankly. The scale of this operation is terrifying, and it's only just begun. So yeah, frightened and worried about how impotent everybody seems to feel.
If more people don't step up to the challenge and help us, then it might not work how we want it to.
What's this? It is fish on pipe. It's what they use to feed their fish. It's not good because as you can see, it just breaks off and gets washed up here. So, yeah.
It feels a lot better to be on the side of history where you're fighting for something rather than when you grow up and your kids ask you what you were doing and you say you kept your head down and ignored it.
I think that might be fish ponds.
This is a really big battle to be putting on children, and it does take a toll, you know? It does take a toll.
And you think more people should notice?
Yeah. Then,
how do you think we show people?
to tell them but not force them to believe you.
Why should you force them?
Because if you force them, they'll definitely think never not to believe you. But if you just don't force them, they might believe you.
Jamie, that is an incredibly astute thing for a 7-year-old to say. I can't tell you that. It's very wise. You're absolutely right.
And you're right, because that's how Sea Savers works, right? We show them what there is to love.
Scotland's already known for its world-class wildlife, but it has the potential to have an even bigger status in that regard.
With the beams of light coming into the water here, it's absolutely beautiful.
To have, massive pods of orca, humpback whales returning to our coast in large numbers.
They're jumping.
All of these things are within grasp if we allow our ocean to recover. And that not only improves the life of the people living here who get to experience those animals, and obviously the health of those animals themselves.
It's pretty special, wasn't it?
Yeah. But imagine the tourism industry from that. And I'm not saying that tourism should be the only jobs that are available, but we should 100% be able to be given the opportunity for our seas and our nature to thrive once again and to not be threatened by all the man-made disasters which are currently threatening them.
We are the Ullapool Sea Savers!
A wise person said to me recently that sustainability is about whether the actions that you're doing can be done as well by your children and your children's children. So something is genuinely sustainable if it leaves enough for the people coming after you indefinitely.
The sea has helped us, and I think it's our turn now to help the sea.
My message to the world is to protect the ocean.
We can make that difference, and we can inspire other people who feel powerless to make differences as well.